Good morning. Got my good vibes cup. And I hope you're having good vibes. I'm going to talk a little bit about power. And when I'm doing these, I'll either be taking a shower and just have a thought come to me. Sometimes it's like this subneural networking that tracks back to a dream that I had or a thought that I had, and then it's just like, it's like a spontagenesis. Let's make up a word. It's like just on the spot, but it's like this accruement of understanding and energy, and then it's just like, I better say something about that, and this is about power. We often look past the most obvious thing that's in front of us at any given time. Power, just like principles, at least it was for me, for my entire life, is like an elusive thing. It's like you're trying to figure out what that is. It's like you're told about the power electric company, the fossil fuel that powers the car, the power system, the power structure. Oh, that person has power. And then you'll watch people shaking their head going, man, no principles, zero principles. And no one ever explains what these things are. You're supposed to, for something that's at the source and that is so important, intrinsic to, like I'm flashing on biomechanics and kinesiology, and the fact that the same thing happens with hip injuries, back injuries, shoulder injuries, spinal injuries that can be 100% avoided and is very avoidable, at least marginally. Speaking of margins, as you've got billions of dollars being spent on specific types of surgeries that come from repetitive misuse of our own planes of motion and what we're capable of doing. And mainly, we're always working in the sagittal plane, but our joint systems and the muscles don't support those specific actions, circumductive actions, frontal plane actions, diagonal actions, working in concert with transverse or rotary type actions. And we think in this two-dimensional way. We're given a two-dimensional construct, but we are not given the rule book on how to properly move and what the pure source, the origin is. And so God meant monad when you look up, certain Gnostic texts or for context. There's a guy named Ralph Ellis, and he's been blowing me away. He's very academic in his approach, so really have to be able to put your ears on and listen to what he's saying. But I never proclaim anyone as knowing everything, but I do believe in a guru status. I think that once a person, if you want to call it that, if a person reaches a certain level of unimpeded, of mastery, that it's a gift to be able to hear them talk on any given subject. And you kind of have to think about, from a multidimensional aspect, of what that individual, what that personality, all of the different, we can call them action potentials, but it really is getting into probability codes and, Heisenberg uncertainty principle about time and placement, events. And so we follow a power structure that's a given. We look at the way that a room is designed, the angles, the degrees, the links of acceptance between people. At first it's just like, oh, this room is too small, this room feels a little bit too big. But there's a preference that is set into place, that is codified within us, that hails back to our perception of ourselves, our size model in the grand scope of things, in the world, in the universe, to other people, and we're always playing and refracting on that. But as you get into the blocks that you see out there in society, literal blocks, when you get into the construct of architecture, if you look at Falconelli, very Mystery at the Cathedrals, very interesting reads there, hailing back to a lot of really elusive, codified, arcane, archaic type of mystery school stuff. But that's why I like to, I've been enjoying watching Ralph Ellis, because he's kind of saying, well, the information's been there. It's this power structure between, the Jewish, the Essene, record keeping between different peoples. And really looking at it and going, or the Roman, record keeping. When you look at it, I guess there were very prolific record keeping mechanisms in play. And, I did put a link here with a couple of his videos. I even put the whole playlist of, countless videos of Ralph Ellis, but I'm just getting into it myself. Saw it on Leak Project with Rex Bear. And heard Nathaniel Gillis on Coast to Coast, but ended up finding out later that he was also up on Leak Project. And that there was kind of a regular show going on there where they were trying to, meet and get together at certain times, but it didn't seem to be working out. But now they've accrued, I think, like 6 to 8 interviews. And I also put a playlist link on this channel for Nathaniel's work. There's like 99 or 100 interviews, probably 100 by now, because he does so many interviews. Sorry, there's some dust floating around in here. So, power. And then Jordan Maxwell, doing his own due diligence with the limited information that he had, really trying to dig in and figure things out. It's this propellant, this incendiary propellant of truth that pervades, goes beyond these power structures. Sorry, there's really bad dust in this environment here. So, power, what is the source of force? What is the power? We look at our grid system, we look at the electrical source, and when we realize that it's mainly coal and oil and, now like wind turbines and other things like that really are hailing right back to the first two, that we start to scratch our heads and think, where's the power? When we see the people that are in power, we look at a money system. But we rarely think about the codified networking as a fractioning off of an elusive, encrypted labyrinth, a matrix, if you will, that obfuscates and hides the source. And that's why Jesus' teachings and writings were so captivating. But to my knowledge, and from Ralph Ellis's very academic conveyance of this, is that he did do writing, but the entire fabrication of him being a carpenter came from the root etymology of the builder, or that was regarded as the mason. And I always postulated and felt that there was a pure son that had lived, finding it very odd that young Sadi, the Zoroaster, some 3,500 years ago in Persia, I think more like 3,600, would, as if on the precipice of this Son of God, shall we say, in a very abstract way, be the harbinger for something that would happen over 1,500 years later. So this seemed to be a work in action. Where are our minds? What do we think about? And in the segmenting, the compartmentalization of ourselves, what are we really thinking? What are we really doing? We stare at a phone 10 hours a day. We talk into it. We watch videos. We are always monitored. We give free agency to all of the corporations that want to view us, spy on us. We don't care anymore. We know that they've already gotten all the information they want, and that it's just further imprinting these algorithms into a sort of a holographic interpretation that's in a computer system that's remodeling and rebuilding the world around us, the pervading world. But what if this world that is kept in real time, where we are, to an exact proximity, what we're feeling, what we're thinking, all these algorithms could so easily be monitored and picked up upon through the use of frequency cymatics, if you will, sound waves bouncing off radio signals and leading into the wave patterns of light and the cancellation there, and the strong and weak nuclear forces, and the electromagnetic bipolarity that's always in existence there, and that you don't need to wear a heart rate monitor for them to know your heart rate. They can see right in through you. So what if this world in the computer were able to be projected back out as a sort of layer over you that you can't see, that you're not aware of? And supposing this dark night satellite, many other things that you aren't aware of and you can't see, like all the little aliens, right, that either live here full time and have been here full time and might always be here in the clouds, looking like clouds, looking like jet streams, just huge craft floating there that we can sort of feel, but we can't see it, so we're all right with it. What about all of that space inside the earth, not really knowing what's in there, but knowing that when you get into a car, you're not driving on the outside of it. You know, it almost seems asinine that you would expose yourself, that we would expose ourselves to such radiation on the surface of the earth, that we would allow gravity to have such an influence on us, as well as all the other, you know, free radical type attacks that we go through, to where we're not able to assert, because of societal patterns, because of the control mechanism, assert a way to preserve ourselves and stay alive. So that gets back into those heavy areas, those heavy influences of the Nag Hammadi, the Dead Sea Scrolls, and other books that are being found in the way of why these books that heavily alluded to reincarnation, re-embodiment, were left out. Science seems to follow these thermodynamic laws through a systemized means, a point of return, an axiom, if you will. Yet, when we look at ourselves, we just accept the degradation. We accept the lack in preservation. So I'll go back to the former question that I asked you is, what are you doing all day? What are you thinking? The better way of asking this is, what do you do with the majority of your time? And then, if we were to put this on a charting system and watch in real time what those alpha and those beta waves and all the other wave patterns, you know, the delta, I mean, it keeps going on, right? But there's almost always like a solfeggio type of a signature where you've got like this 6 to 8, right? And then an elusive ninth, what that 9 really represents. You know, that 369, 666, 18, right? In movement, in pattern. But once it's static, it no longer represents the same thing. It still adds up to the same thing, like 666, it's always 666, if you wanted to look at it in a moment of quantification. But if you really took it in its essence, you would see 369, and the 3 comes from the 9, and it goes back around, right, through this revolution, back to the 3, adds into the 6, right, and then it just keeps rotating about. It always maintains itself at 369, but the 3 is what's being transferred through. 3 is always being transferred through, so it's in movement constantly. And this also gets into these experiments that were done by the Nazis, the SS, that were very esoteric in their origins. And, you know, I haven't heard anybody talking about the Nazi bell lately, the Die Glocken, but a good 10 years ago, that was a very heavy topic because of what it was inferring, which was exactly what I'm talking about, like the quantum computer, supercomputer interfacing, layering that is occurring in real time in order to set about a behavioral control in our endocrine systems within our free will, our assumed free will, and to represent a time placement of you're not going to be allowed to move on unless you are compliant, and we can pick someone else, but you're going to have to play the game. You're going to have emotional responses. You're going to have legal responses. You're going to have financial responses to any assaultive sort of situation, and this perpetuation of having you spin in your own place, in your own energy. You can only produce chaos. You can only act out like the narcissist and the heavy multiplication of the narcissist, the malignant narcissist. Not just someone who has narcissistic traits or tendencies, like the children of narcissists who really don't have anything else to fall back on or understand. And this gets back into principles. This gets back into power systems. Is that people are walking around that haven't had the opportunity to think about what principles are. And then even more so, how they might work together, right? And the way that we can understand this is by backward engineering what's happening to us through these malignant narcissists, these sociopaths, these borderlines, these histrionics, the people who are there to cause ill will toward us if we are trying to express or represent or just have contained within ourselves a certain level of purity. Look, you're not a bad person if you've fallen away from this. In fact, it's part of this whole esoteric passage that there was no way through. You didn't see the light because the light was obnubilated by all of the BS that we talk about and more. The source of force is the question of the day. And if you have impurity as an abstract at the source of what's going on when you are under attack, when all the rules that you see around you of your demise and everyone else's, and then the karmic return and the judgment upon you for not being a good straw man, a good straw woman, not following along and being almost like a robot. That's how I thought back in the day when I would do 17 hours a day, session after session, and keep myself under 5% body fat, and drinking flats of pure protein, pre-mixed powder, and 2 gallons of water, along with my vitamins and minerals every single day. I realized this 15 years ago or longer, that what it really was wanting, not acknowledging it, but trying to find a way through, was it wants you to be a robot. It wants you to act things out as if you are just a component within a machine. And we can't get away from that fact that there is a heavy influence that even goes back to the Vedas, that when you really start scratching your head, you're going, is Satan a computer system? Is it a living computer system? Is it a systemized way, a codified system, where it can live in an elusive sort of way, right? Like the pentagram, where it has its own sigil, it has its own way, it has its rebellion against the Metatron's cube. Represents like this, it's also called like the flower of life. It depends on where you're capturing its base, but you have the 6 spheres that are surrounding a center point, and that through certain occulted esoteric studies, we realize that there's always this theme of black and white, left or right, you know, that there is, that the center essentially signifies 2 places at one time, and that we get into the aspects of entropy, and we think that's just a mainstay, it's just a constant. But in truth, it's not. In truth, what's been hidden is the fact that death does not exist. Well, it's clearly stated, right? You know, energy cannot be created nor destroyed, but we're taught something else in our daily walk. Life sucks, and it's over. But the truth is that life sucks, and then we lose that possibility. We get amnesia through the amniotic fluid, and the passage through that, through the gates of birth, or the pillars, and we come back out with yet more confusion, because we're now tied into these physical genetic codes, because we have unknowingly rejected a body, spiritual, mind-body connection in past lives, where we're completely fucked up. And that's what we have. We have all these people that are kind of walking around like, who the hell am I? What is this? Well, I better just keep my nose to the grindstone and do what I'm supposed to do to survive. But then that's not good enough. Like, we're successful, we make all this money. It sucks. Then we're you know, out on the street, or we're broke, and that sucks. But there's more spiritual freedom, right? And when we get into the concept of the cornerstone rejected by society, that is a center, that is a middle point, that a Messiah pointed us toward this pure source energy, and that's why the word purity in original text is used so often, you know? And it didn't delineate between like Sophia being considered a more feminine energy. This is not the feminine of what you understand as human females in biology. It has nothing to do with it. It is a description of a polarity, and that part of the polarity, when you look at the positive and negative, like just look at the male energy is universally traveling, right? And the female energy is circulating and building, right? So when you put them together, you have like divine knowledge and matriculation occurring. But then you look at the schools of thought and where the power structures are, and this does get heavily into like Jordan Maxwell's work, right? Is where you start to see these power structures resembling a macro construct of different wings, different arms that are hidden in plain sight. You could call them civic arms, things that aren't really part of the government, like the IRS, like Child Protective Services, CPS. None of these institutions do what they're supposed to do. The fix is quite easy, and that is a moneyless system, whether you agree on that or not. There's no need for money, but that's a talk of another day. But really gets into the tally stick, and if we've got an electronic system, we have the ability to use an electronic tally stick, and it's like the mystique and the mystery of that surrounds Bitcoin in a sort of orc cloud. It's 21 million Bitcoin that can be divided and, you know, spread out as Satoshi units, and if we just agreed on one system of economy and commerce, we could start with that. But the truth is that we don't even need a system like that. There's too much competition, and it would be impossible to keep people away from their own dastardly pursuits through the expression of degraded genetic information. So is CRISPR, is Mark Zuckerberg trying to make the world better? Are the people that are working in DeFi trying to make the world better? Because these are all just codified systems. It's taking out the junk, getting rid of the junk, putting it in a big trash heap. Not even like burning in the traditional sense with cryptocurrency is just sending it to a dead wallet. Doesn't exist. It's a wallet that you can't retrieve anything back out of. One day somebody will probably find a way to retrieve it. And then we start to see how time, space is a commodity. That if everything that was happening all at once could be recorded in real time and gone back to and revisited, that as the massive mind of this supercomputer system was able to differentiate between probabilities and actions, action potentials, that more and more information that could crack the code of the monad would be readily at the disposal of a very arbitrary, like the term reptilian always comes up because of that, the scaly skin and the lack of an emotionality. But YouTube's been amazing in the fact that it's displayed that reptilians aren't that way. Just because something has scaly skin and it's cold-blooded doesn't mean it doesn't feel at all. In fact, just like other animals, the reptilian feels a lot. And so if we really did get into that reptilian base, brainstem activity that's going on with us, that is where the true essence, without all of the other organelle that's added on to us, that creates such confusion between different hemispheres of the brain, that is where the truth, when we talk about a soul, this ganglionic mass behind our solar plexus, the vagus nerve, that our central nervous system and what is centered to that is where our power system lies as far as any sort of physiological event. So this gets heavy into Kundalini and other concepts that have to do with chakra energy and chakra points and so forth. But the main issue with that is that we are trying to quantify, we're trying to take our base energy structure of where the energies reverberate from, and to say, so the simpler way to look at it is to look at Metatron's cube. You have the 6 spheres, you have the center, right? And then you look at what's called the flower of life. That is everything that comes out of that. That just like the Fibonacci code, all of these other resonant energies travel on. But the thing that happens is, and the thing that we're unaware of most of the time, is that there is a segment or a zone, a boundary, if you will, a quadrant, where the mathematics, the vortex mathematics, as it's been called, using vortices, string theory, like a chain of, just like cryptocurrency, just like our DNA, just like everything. It's a codified system. When one number system has basically been completed, and it has to be completed in order to quantify itself so that it can be validated, validator nodes and all this, right, to go on to the next segment of numbers or number system, right? And you start to see that there's all these circles, right? All these circles, different colors. I hate to use the term because like red shift, blue shift, it's heavily misused, but I do believe that, like, I'm using shift as this is as good as we've got at the moment. And I realize there are people who would argue this is not really red, this is not really blue. But I beg to differ as far as frequency and the cymatic influence and where the light waves meet the sound waves, and there's a cancellation of this particular number unit. And so it's the science of manipulating that, and that gets into Bob Lazar, Robert Bigelow. It gets into how these craft and the elements that were found, that when it's looked at in a non-transient state, what is it, element 150 or 115? Yeah, I apologize, I digress. I watched something the other night, but I can't really remember. But this element was said to, in its study, to be way too volatile, way too unstable to serve, and it's like, it's transient. It's in a transient state, and when it's placed into the processing of spin energies, we're talking about high velocity spin, it can disperse more easily, and possibly become a part of, within that spherical coding system of swirl-on energy, high rates of speed, energetics, that a disbursement may take place where subparticles are there to join. Because if you look at quarks and their behavior, you're looking at the same thing, I'm going to embarrass myself because it's been so many years, but it's like you have, up, down, charm, strange, top, bottom. And then, you get into these different areas of size, and how there is such a huge difference between the subparticle, the theoretical size of these constituents. And so you're talking about the recreation and the representation of a key to the codified system that can, and most likely does, just like Metatron's cube, reverberate out and affect the field around it in a particular way where it can be manipulated. And when you get into the fact that a lot of these rituals that are done, that have always been done, they're, whether it's paganism or modern day Wiccanism or Druidism, witchcraft, what have you, there is always a very similar or the same methodology where you've got people culminating together in a one-mind principle, focusing on a specific outcome, dressed a certain way, and opening themselves up as transient bodies, avatars, if you will, for specific energies. And what's the difference between that and what Tom Cruise does, and how he continues to be completely insane? It's like, didn't we learn enough from L. Ron Hubbard, Aleister Crowley, and Jack Parsons? Like, documented stories. It's very bizarre what we put up with. But it also gets back into heavy themes that correlate back to Hinduism and these gods in Hinduism, where they say, I've seen different numbers of speculation as far as how many gods there are. And the bottom line is there's pretty much a god for every person. And that Nathaniel Gillis's work points back at the fact that those who were considered dead were also considered gods. Like the people who left the passage of the body, of the corporeal, the carnal, of the temporal, went into this place that we consider liminal. It's probably much more vast than this is, and it's probably controlling this through a network of exchange, of barter, of soul trafficking. And this gets into Robert Bigelow's work. He didn't say it, but the inferences are undeniable that he's put his whole life, he's a multi-billionaire, and millions upon millions of dollars into researching whether or not, first validating, is there life after death, and then to realize how ridiculous it was to consider death in the first place. But then the awestruck aha moment of what the hell's going on here, right? What the hell is going on here? And the strange seeming trickery and themes that seem so abstract with the behavior at Skinwalker Ranch, other ranches as well, other places, but that you see certain ley line zone epicenters, if you will, where there seem to be portals, and even more so through the equinoxes, there seems to be a switching over time of this sort of paradox window, right? So, in conclusion, we always have a choice. And there's going to be a lot of people, in fact, billions, that are completely flabbergasted when work undeniably comes out and is validated. Like a lot of Ralph Ellis's work, he's an academic, he's perspicacious in his thought and his process. All that's lacking there is, a certain validation of appeal to where it shakes the foundation of these churches. And then to prove, the missing link is to prove that the Vatican has understood this information, especially in regards to Mary and Mary Magdalene being Jesus' wife, Jesus having been a Mason, which really goes back to like the Knights Templar and the Templar secrets, and the Templars being heavily corrupted ultimately, not left alone, by spiritual forces. And we love to get into this idea of good and bad, and in the movies we watch and what we've taught, and we're getting away from that, right? Where, like, even the last Avatar, right, the way of the water or whatnot. And by the way, that's what Jesus the Essene called the way that he talked about, that was written about and that he learned hundreds of years before that. Like a lot of the things that Jesus said. There's another link down below, and it's one of the interviews that was just before Ralph Ellis, and don't remember the guy's name, but I did look into it, and he came up with some really amazing points. But these postulations when you take away any bias, have the same information encoded. The same information's in there. So due diligence to look into this, due diligence to really do your own research, but to find out that if you come into the information that's undeniable through recorded history, that Jesus was a Mason, that he was from a wealthy family, that he was considered royalty, that the codices both bent and manipulated and morphed the story. And if a similar thing could even be said with the Zoroaster, young Sadi, Zarathustra, in Persia, 3,500 years ago, 35 to 3,700 years ago, we have to see that these royal families have always fabricated this false history of a purer and more principle-based center, just so that they could keep in power. But that in doing so, they have revealed that the true power is purity. And if people in a one-mind principle were to embrace purity, it doesn't matter if you haven't lived pure, it doesn't matter if you're a murderer, it really doesn't. It doesn't matter the heinous, terrible things that you've done. You are off the hook because of the heavy influence. We're not going to call them demons, jinn, molters, any of the other names, fallen angels. We're not going to use their nomenclature. We're not going to use the etymology that they project to us. We're going to say that there are businessmen on the other side. Ones that didn't ever have to re-embody, because it's about the God concept being this level of omnipotence, being in power, a trafficking of souls, and the consumption, soul consumption of the energy. And that purity itself, if we were all to maintain in 1 minute at any given time a pure, if we weren't abstracted and tricked into thinking that the false straw man persona that's placed on us, that we are a murderer, that we are a crook, that we are a thief, that we are a whore, that we are a liar, if we could ever get back to that, most people haven't even postulated that. They think, oh, that's a fairy tale. And it's so essential. It's so essential in your meditations, because without that purity and without that reckoning, without that embracement, without that reverberation that predates our birth here, without the ability to feel that purity, to become clear, to become clean, but more so to become pure and to know yourself in purity, then you take on all the falsity that is done through you by these strange, the strange liminal beings, through action and deed that has been through you, where you are taking on that behavior. And you have to come to terms, once you do embrace the purity, is that there's no way you could ever do that. And it gets heavily into Friedrich Nietzsche, where there's this argument with yourself where you think, I could not have done that. And then in acceptance, I did that. And then it's charted. It's time-stamped. It's signatured. But it's a false reality. It's a false world that is being recorded and projected back on us. And there's even postulation as to say that the right is sort of projecting out this information, right? That our bodies are actually doing it. And the left is sort of taking in. So you have this succubus sort of energy and this incubus energy, right? To where there's a bifurcation that we represent, where there's an entirety, there's two halves of a person, and one half lives in one dimension, the other half lives in another dimension, so to speak, where you have the right-hand path and you have the left-hand path. We have to move beyond that argument, because it will just keep us playing tennis with ourselves and keep us in this sort of mental mind funk. We need to move away from that, and we need to move toward both sides have to find unity in purification in order for there to be, in order for grace, which is extremely, metanoia is an extreme change in behavior, extreme change in direction, extreme change in mind, in soul. That's something cataclysmic, or a realization, a quickening, if you will, going back to Art Bell, a quickening is upon us, and that we can't stave this off any longer.